In a small, quiet town nestled in the heart of Colombia, life seemed to hum along at a peaceful pace, with its 17,000 inhabitants going about their daily routines. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the rhythm of life is slow and predictable. But, as often happens in such towns, beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the foundations of this tight-knit community. Maria del Carmen Arango was a woman born into modest circumstances. Growing up in a large family, with 11 siblings, her early years were marked by struggle. Her father had passed away when she was just a child, leaving her mother to raise all of them alone. Despite the challenges, Maria was always full of life, lively, beautiful, and driven. She dreamed of something bigger, something more than what her small town could offer, and in 1996, she made the brave decision to leave her home behind and move to Pereira to study aesthetics. At the time, it seemed like a move toward a better future. She was young, hopeful, and eager to carve out her own path. But, as with many young dreamers, reality had its own plans. In 2001, just as Maria was beginning to settle into her new life, she discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like a ton of bricks. The father of the child was a man she had been involved with some time before, someone she had briefly known, but who, according to Maria, was now living in Spain. She didn't let on too much about the details. She made it clear that she was on her own in this, no need for anyone else to get involved. However, she wasn't truly alone. Enter José Franz Diaz, a man who would change the course of her life in ways she never anticipated. José was a respected priest in the nearby town of Mistrato, known for his devotion to the church and his community. He was the epitome of what a man of the cloth should be: dedicated, generous, and entirely devoted to his faith. To the people of Mistrato, José was a pillar of virtue, someone you could count on without question. But behind this virtuous image was a secret. José, despite his role as a priest, had been carrying on a relationship with Maria del Carmen for years. Their affair began in Buenos Aires, when Maria was just 17 and José was already 40. From the start, their relationship was anything but conventional. There was the age gap, the obvious ethical implications, and of course, the fact that José had taken a vow of celibacy. Yet, despite these obstacles, they continued their affair in secrecy. When Maria moved to Pereira, José, fearing that their relationship might be exposed, was transferred to another town in 1996. Maria, in turn, returned to Pereira, but the bond they shared didn't break. Their love affair, though hidden, was a constant thread that ran through their lives, and it would only grow more complicated with time. José's role as a priest meant he had to tread carefully. He couldn't afford to let anyone suspect what was really going on. And so, their secret continued, with both of them living in separate towns, keeping up the charade of a simple, platonic connection. But for Maria, the situation was far from simple. She clung to a dream that José would one day leave the church, that he would choose her and their child over his vows and his sacred position. It was a dream that filled her with hope, even when reality seemed to pull them further apart. As the months passed, José's visits became less frequent. He still helped her financially and offered emotional support, but something had shifted. He began to pull away, leaving Maria feeling more and more isolated. She felt as though the dream of a future together was slipping through her fingers. And yet, despite the distance between them, the relationship continued, lingering in the background of their lives like an unspoken promise. Maria del Carmen's world was changing, and she was beginning to realize that the life she had imagined wasn't going to materialize. But she wasn't ready to give up on the dream just yet. After all, she still believed that her pregnancy might be the key to convincing Jose to finally choose her over his vows, that the arrival of their child might finally be enough to bring him to her side. Little did she know, however, that the twists and turns ahead would lead her down a path far darker and more treacherous than she could ever have imagined. As months turned into years, Maria del Carmen found herself trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment. She had always believed that the arrival of their child, Maria Camila, would finally be the catalyst for change. The idea that Jose, her lover and the father of her child, would one day leave the church and build a life with her kept her going, despite the mounting obstacles. However, the reality of their situation was far from what Maria had envisioned. Jose, on the other hand, remained steadfast in his commitment to his vocation. Though he continued to help Maria financially and offered emotional support, his fear of the consequences of their relationship grew. He had made a vow to God, a vow he took seriously, and he wasn't willing to let a relationship, no matter how deep, tear him away from his calling. The more time passed, the more the divide between their worlds seemed to widen. Jose knew that a relationship with Maria was a betrayal of everything he stood for. But the love he felt for her, as well as the sense of responsibility he felt toward their daughter, kept him tethered to her, even if only in secret. Maria's dreams of a life together with Jose began to fade as she realized that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. Jose's visits became less frequent. His promises grew emptier, and Maria was left alone with the weight of her desires and her frustrations. The tender gestures of the past no longer seemed to carry the same meaning. He had stopped visiting as often, and their communication dwindled to nothing more than the occasional phone call or short message. The man who had once been so devoted to her was now withdrawing, and she couldn't understand why. As a mother, Maria felt an overwhelming need for stability. She wanted her daughter to grow up in a family where both parents were present, where love was nurtured, and where promises were kept. But Jose's continued absence sent her spiraling into doubt. She began to question not just his commitment to her, but his commitment to the relationship itself. In her mind, his love should have been enough to make him leave the church. But with each passing day, it seemed less and less likely. Frustrated and lonely, Maria started confiding in others in the town, hoping that if more people knew the truth, maybe something would change. She told a few close friends about her relationship with Jose, about the child they had together, and the hope that Jose would one day leave his life in the church to be with her. It wasn't something she was proud of, but at that point, she was desperate. It felt like the only way to make her feelings known, to stop hiding in the shadows. But sharing the truth with others brought unexpected consequences. Though some were sympathetic, others were less kind. The whispers of Maria's secret affair began to spread throughout the town, and soon what had once been a hidden relationship was now an open topic of conversation. Maria had hoped that revealing the truth would free her from the burden of secrecy, but instead, it seemed to trap her even further. The whispers and judgment from the community only made things worse. The situation reached a boiling point when Maria realized that, despite everything, despite her sacrifices, despite the hope that she had invested in their future, Jose was not going to leave the church. He was not going to abandon his calling, no matter how much Maria wished for it. The more she thought about it, the more the harsh truth settled in. Jose was never going to give up the church for her, and the life they had dreamed of together was just that, a dream. Maria began to feel not only the weight of her own heartache, but also the overwhelming burden of being left in the lurch. She had poured so much of herself into this relationship, believing it would eventually lead to a future she had longed for. But now, with each passing day, it was becoming clear that her hopes were nothing more than fantasies. The relationship that had once brought her comfort now felt like a prison. Maria started to resent Jose, not for the love he had shown her in the past, but for the hope he had kindled and then allowed to die. He had promised her a future that never materialized, and in doing so, he had unknowingly fueled her greatest disappointment. He had been there for her in many ways, but ultimately, he had failed her in the most crucial one, by refusing to give her the life they both deserved. Maria's feelings of betrayal grew stronger, and the longing for a better life for her daughter became even more urgent. She had to make a decision. Would she continue to wait for a man who would never choose her? Or would she move on and build a new life for herself and Maria Camilla? The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Maria del Carmen could no longer keep waiting for a man who refused to step into the life he had promised her. The pain of waiting had become unbearable, and Maria knew that if she was ever going to find peace, she had to take control of her own destiny. At the same time, Jose faced his own internal battle. His role as a priest required him to maintain a facade of purity, but his feelings for Maria could no longer be ignored. He was torn between his love for her, his duty to the church, and the growing realization that he had caused her deep emotional pain. But for Jose, the stakes were too high. The shame of leaving the priesthood, the rejection of everything he had worked for, was too great. In his mind, there was no way forward that wouldn't lead to losing everything he had built. So, he chose to retreat, to avoid confronting the reality of the situation, and to push Maria further away. As their worlds continued to drift apart, Maria's frustration reached its peak. She was no longer content to live in the shadows, nor was she willing to accept the half-life Jose had offered her. The love she once believed in had become an anchor, holding her back from the life she knew she deserved. The question now was not whether she could wait any longer, but whether she was strong enough to move on and leave the past behind. Maria del Carmen's life had always been a delicate balance between hope and despair, but in early 2007, the scales tipped dramatically. The once quiet whispers of suspicion grew louder and more persistent. Rumors began circulating around the town, rumors that Jose Francey, the man she had trusted, might be hiding something. Specifically, there were whispers of another woman, a younger woman whom Jose had supposedly been seeing. The thought of it sent a chill through Maria's heart. She had already given so much of herself to him, believing in the promises he had made. But now, doubts started to creep in. Was he really the man she had hoped he was? Or had she been blind to the truth all along? At first, Maria dismissed the rumors. After all, Jose had always been there for her, even if from a distance. But as the gossip grew louder, the cracks in her belief began to widen. She couldn't ignore the signs any longer. There had been hints of his emotional withdrawal, and now, these rumors about a possible lover seemed like too much of a coincidence. Maria confronted him, demanding the truth. She asked him about the young woman everyone was talking about. Jose's response was quick and defensive. He denied everything, claiming that the young woman in question was nothing more than a niece he had taken in to help out, a girl who had fallen on hard times. To him, there was nothing more to the story. But Maria wasn't buying it. She had heard too much, seen too many signs to simply accept his word without question. His reassurances rang hollow in her ears. For months, Maria had lived in the shadows, clinging to the hope that José would eventually choose her over everything else. But now, the weight of her suspicions was too much to bear. The betrayal she feared had become a tangible reality, and the anger and frustration that had been building inside her exploded. Desperate for answers, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She could no longer hide in the background, waiting for things to change. She would confront José, not just privately, but publicly. In February 2007, Maria packed up her daughter, Maria Camila, and traveled to Mistrato, the town where José had been living for years. With determination in her heart and a desire to reveal the truth, Maria began to openly tell people in the town that her daughter was José's child. She made no attempt to conceal the reality of their relationship anymore. As she walked through the streets with Maria Camila in tow, she began to speak out, telling anyone who would listen that the child was not just hers, but José's. The truth, as she saw it, had to be known. The lies, the secrecy, the hidden life. She could no longer carry this burden alone. Her actions sent shockwaves through the community. For years, people had suspected something between Maria and the priest, but no one had dared to speak of it openly. Now, Maria had laid it bare for all to see, and the reaction was immediate. Some people were shocked, others were sympathetic, but all of them were stunned by the boldness of her revelation. The town that had once looked the other way now had to reckon with the truth of their own sacred priest's actions. But as the town buzzed with gossip and disbelief, Maria's actions set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The police became involved when Maria del Carmen's family, alarmed by her sudden disappearance, reported her and Maria Camila missing. They had not heard from her in days, and the uncertainty of her whereabouts worried them deeply. The authorities launched a search for the two women, but no leads seemed to emerge. Days turned into weeks, and still no one could find them. Meanwhile, in the town, the revelation of Maria del Carmen's accusations about José was the talk of the town. People began to wonder how far José would go to cover up the truth, and whether the priest was capable of taking extreme measures to protect his reputation. As the investigation into their disappearance continued, the town remained on edge, not knowing whether they would ever see Maria del Carmen or her daughter again. Months passed without any word from Maria or her daughter. But then, in June of 2007, a break in the case came. An investigator named Everett Palacios, who had been working on the case, saw a photograph of Maria del Carmen and Maria Camila in the local newspaper. The photo, published by Maria's family, immediately caught his attention. He recognized something in the faces of the women, a connection he couldn't ignore. Shortly after, he made a chilling connection to two bodies that had been found months earlier in February, in a rural area not far from Mistrato. The bodies had been discovered by a local resident who had stumbled upon them while walking through the area. The remains were badly burned, and the police had initially been unable to identify them. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that these were the bodies of two victims, one adult woman and one child. When the investigators saw the photograph, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The bodies had been found just days after Maria del Carmen and her daughter had disappeared. And now, with the photograph in hand, it seemed like the connection was undeniable. The police began to piece together the clues. They learned that the bodies had been burned beyond recognition, but certain items had been found near the remains: a bracelet, a piece of jewelry, and a medal of the Virgin del Carmen, which Maria del Carmen had worn. The investigators' hunch was confirmed when the forensic team ran tests on the bodies and found that they were indeed Maria del Carmen and Maria Camila. Now, the case had turned from a missing persons report into a homicide investigation, and the focus shifted squarely onto José Francey. With the evidence mounting against him, José Francey's world began to unravel. The police found traces of blood inside his home, and a housekeeper reported that she had noticed suspicious signs of bloodstains and tampering around the time of the women's disappearance. The discovery was a crucial turning point in the investigation. The blood was identified as belonging to Maria del Carmen and her daughter, confirming the worst fears of everyone involved. Now, with the evidence against him, the case was moving rapidly toward a resolution. The police began to focus on José as the primary suspect. They questioned him, but he denied any involvement in the deaths of Maria del Carmen and Maria Camila. However, the mounting evidence, blood in his home, a suspiciously close timeline, and the connections between the photograph and the bodies, was too much to ignore. The police were closing in on José, and soon the truth would be revealed. The public had long suspected him of wrongdoing, but now, with the weight of the evidence, it seemed that the final chapter of this tragic story was about to be written. As the investigation unfolded, the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fit together. The authorities had already uncovered the crucial evidence linking José Francey to the disappearance and deaths of Maria del Carmen and her daughter, Maria Camila. Traces of blood were found in his home, an undeniable sign of the violence that had taken place. Furthermore, a housekeeper who had been responsible for cleaning the priest's residence testified that she had seen disturbing signs of tampering and bloodstains around the time of the women's disappearance. The signs were unmistakable, and as the forensic team conducted further tests, the worst fears of the investigators were confirmed. Maria del Carmen and her daughter had been brutally murdered. Initially, José Francey denied any involvement in the deaths, maintaining his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. He seemed to believe that his position in the community, his role as a priest, would shield him from suspicion. But the truth had a way of coming to light, and as the investigation progressed, José's defense crumbled. When confronted with the mounting evidence, José finally admitted to the crime. He confessed that he had meticulously planned the murders of Maria del Carmen and Maria Camila, driven by the fear that Maria would expose his long-hidden secret, an exposure that would irreparably destroy his career as a priest. He was unwilling to lose everything he had built, unwilling to face the shame of being publicly branded a hypocrite and betrayer of his sacred vows. José Francey's confession marked the turning point of the investigation. It was the moment when the full scale of his betrayal and the brutal consequences of his actions were laid bare. The police arrested José and his accomplice, Antonio Morales, the cemetery worker who had assisted in carrying out the murders. Together, they had planned and executed the heinous crime, aiming to silence Maria del Carmen and her daughter once and for all. Antonio, who had helped José dispose of the bodies and burn the evidence, was also arrested and charged with double homicide. The trial was swift, and both José Francey and Antonio Morales were convicted. However, the family of the victims, devastated by the loss of two beloved family members, felt that the sentences handed down were far too lenient. For them, no punishment could ever bring back Maria del Carmen and Maria Camila, but they felt strongly that the justice system had not delivered a fair sentence. They appealed the verdict, demanding that the punishment reflect the gravity of the crime. In response to their appeal, the court reviewed the case and, in 2013, increased José Francey's sentence to 45 years and 10 months in prison. Antonio Morales received a sentence of 17 years and 2 months. While these sentences were still not Enough to appease the grieving family, they were seen as a small step toward justice being served. But the consequences of José's actions didn't stop there. The Catholic Church, which had long been aware of José Francey's relationship with María del Carmen, was also held accountable for its role in the cover-up. Despite knowing about the affair, church officials had chosen to ignore it, likely hoping that the truth would never come to light. Their failure to intervene, to take action against a priest who was breaking his vows, was deemed a gross oversight. As a result, the church was ordered to pay a substantial compensation to the families of the victims. This ruling sent a clear message that even institutions with vast power and influence were not above the law. The case, while ultimately resolved through the justice system, left deep scars in the community. The betrayal of trust, the exploitation of faith, and the cold-blooded murder of two innocent women shook the very foundation of the town. People were left to grapple with the truth about the man they had once respected and admired. The priest, who had been a symbol of virtue and devotion, was now seen as nothing more than a manipulative and deceitful criminal. For the families of the victims, the trauma of the loss would never fully heal. María del Carmen's dream of a life with José had ended in the most tragic and violent way imaginable, and Maria Camila, an innocent child, had been taken before her time. The emotional toll on the family was immense, and though the legal system had delivered a verdict, the emotional wounds would remain. This story stands as a stark reminder of the complexities of human relationships, the devastating consequences of betrayal, and the lengths people will go to hide the truth. It highlights how deeply a person's actions can affect not only their own life, but the lives of everyone around them. José Francey, a man who had sworn to serve others with integrity, had instead chosen deception, manipulation, and violence. His actions, fueled by fear and selfishness, led to the untimely deaths of two people who had trusted him and shattered a community's faith in its leader.